The emergency session opened under dim amber light, with the Galactic Council's central hollow filled by a stuttering map of the Thessari archival worlds. One by one, their memory crucibles flashed red, then black, then gray static where centuries should have been. The solar flare cascade had lasted less than 9 minutes. The data corruption it caused had eaten dynastic rolls, campaign ledgers, oath tables, ship registries, and adjudication transcripts that the Thessari governors used to prove every claim they made. Delegates from smaller polities watched in stunned silence because they understood the crux immediately. This was not a clerical outage, but a civilizational amputation. The Thessari Senate did not react with grief. They reacted with insulted pride. Supreme Archivist Kelt Varin rose from the Blackstone bench reserved for imperial houses and spoke with clipped contempt. "Administrative inconvenience," he declared, as if saying the phrase often enough would force it into truth. "The Empire of Thessar does not collapse because machines fail. We remember in blood. We remember in rank. We remember in victory." Several council species exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen what Thessari doctrine called memory before. Selective remembrance, codified by those with fleets. Varin pivoted his crest toward the human delegation bay and projected a highlighted line from Kipri Station's registry index. "One surviving comprehensive mirror," he said, "maintained by a single mammal custodian, a hobby shelf. We will be collecting it at once." The legal clerk from the Valeri requested treaty procedure in a voice that shook despite translation dampers. "Station Capri is neutral infrastructure under interspecies heritage compact. Transfer requires quorum review, chain authentication, and custodial consent." The Thessari response came as laughter in layered resonance, a harsh, clicking cadence that carried through the chamber. Varin spread all 4 manipulator limbs in ceremonial dismissal. "Law follows power, always has. Your compact is decorative parchment wrapped around fear." He leaned forward, eyes bright as forged metal. "If any species imagines this archive belongs to a human by right, they confuse temporary custody with ownership. We do not petition children for family property." By the 3rd day after the flare cascade, Thessari military channels had shifted from derision to operational threats. High Commander Mitchell appeared on every open relay, framed by the command dais of the Spear of Vark, with 2 house standards burning cobalt behind him. His voice arrived flat and deliberate, the tone of someone announcing weather rather than coercion. "Humans are soft archivists," he said. "Ink-fingered children who never learn the discipline of ritual blood contests. A species that avoids duels cannot understand history, because history is forged by those prepared to lose flesh for it." He did not raise his volume. He did not need to. "Kipri will submit all Thessari materials immediately. If humanity resists, my Marines will retrieve what matters and burn the rest. Memory belongs to those strong enough to seize it." The threat was not empty theater. The Thessari had built their regional dominance on shock doctrine that broke smaller powers in one cycle. Jump in hard, strike command nodes, flood corridors with armored infantry, broadcast one surrender window, then rewrite whatever narrative remained. Their fleets were engineered for intimidation as much as combat, with long dorsal spines and ceremonial impact rams that made every approach vector look like an execution. For 2 generations, that method had worked against merchant leagues, frontier coalitions, and one reformist consortium, now taught in military academies only as the Brief Rebellion. Mitchell had led 3 of those campaigns. The surviving records, bitterly enough for him, existed in Kipri's vault stacks under Mara Ellis's metadata tags. The council chamber felt smaller as the sorry legal emissaries filed a seizure petition stripped of every required signature. They attached no stewardship request, no joint preservation plan, no commitment to non-alteration. They simply appended military transit schedules and a countdown marker labeled retrieval window. When the chair asked whether the Empire acknowledged heritage protections, Varen answered with formal disdain. Protections are granted by stable powers to provisional societies. Thessar grants, Thessar revokes. He turned his gaze toward Earth's envoy bench. Do not confuse our momentary administrative disruption with weakness. This is your one instruction. Hand over all Imperial records and stand clear of docking approaches. Across from him sat Earth's envoy, Ambassador Elena Volkov, still as carved basalt. She made no theatrical gestures, no protest display for cameras, no appeal to sentiment. She listened through the full statement and took exactly 4 notes on a paper pad that drew murmurs from delegates who considered analog writing quaint. The choice was deliberate. Paper did not crash under solar weather. Paper did not obey remote commands. When she finally spoke, her tone carried no anger, only precision. Your petition is unlawful under 5 signatory regimes and void on filing. Neutral archives are not trophies. You are requesting seizure authority over protected heritage in active custody. Denied. Varen started to interrupt. Volkov kept speaking. If you proceed militarily, it will be recorded as deliberate aggression against all signatories, not bilateral dispute. Mitchell answered her on a delay of 11 seconds, transmitted from his flagship instead of the chamber feed, which made the message feel like a blade pushed through ceremony. Ambassador, your species mistakes administrative vocabulary for strategic leverage. You are tolerated because you catalog what older powers cannot be bothered to sort. Do not mistake tolerated function for sovereign parity. Withdraw your personnel from Kepri and prepare transfer documentation. 1 hour after this broadcast, any remaining resistance will be classified as obstruction. The era of librarians ends tonight. He cut the channel before protocol allowed rebuttal. News loops seized on the phrase within minutes. The era of librarians ends tonight. On Triune markets, it became a joke line on counterfeit drink labels. On military boards, it became a warning marker. On Kepri Station, it became a timing reference for defense rotations. Mara Ellis heard it while standing in Stack 9, palm against a crystallized storage spine that contained oral epics from 5 species, including the oldest surviving Thessari coronation chronicle. She had spent 12 years building cross-indexes no one celebrated because proper archival work looked boring, until disaster made it indispensable. She did not flinch when the channel repeated Mitchell's statement. She told her assistant to lock environmental buffers and continued checking checksum drift by hand. Kepri itself was an argument disguised as infrastructure. Neutral registry, mixed staffing, cargo architecture layered around a core that housed treaty memory vaults, legal repositories, and cultural records too politically sensitive to leave under single-species control. Mara knew every maintenance shaft and every jurisdictional blind spot. She also knew what the sorry boarding doctrine expected from civilians. Panic, confusion, pleading. Her team had rehearsed something else. Not because they were soldiers pretending to be archivists, but because archivists in contested space learned quickly that preservation without defense was optimism, dressed as policy. Around her, technicians from Earth, Valari, and 2 smaller houses began quiet contingency routines, mirror integrity checks, vault seal cycles, comms redundancy, and sealed witness channels to the Council. On Luna Defense Ring, Admiral James Cooper watched Mitchell's fleet disposition update in real time and said nothing for almost a minute. His operations chief, Commander Anna Nielsen, read the silence correctly. "He means to force a legal precedent at gunpoint," she said. Cooper nodded once. "He means to perform dominance theater for his Senate. If Khepri falls fast, everyone revises their risk models toward surrender." He looked at the projected station schematic, then at the encrypted packet marked Archive Escort. Outsiders treated those escorts as ceremonial couriers with too much protocol training and not enough armament. Cooper had approved their doctrine personally. "Signal Khepri that all guardianship clauses are active," he said, "and notify Allied observers that any assault footage must stream live without interruption. If they want spectacle, we provide documentation." On Earth's diplomatic wing, Volkov joined Mara over narrowband with legal witnesses listening. "Mara, I need final confirmation from custodial authority," she said. "Do you surrender protected holdings under threat?" Mara's answer remained calm, almost gentle, a librarian speaking through the largest political fault line in the sector. "No surrender. Custody remains lawful and intact. Record that for 300 years humanity has preserved records others neglected. Record that we defend memory with the same seriousness others reserve for territory." Volkov closed her eyes briefly, then read the clause into the log. "Acknowledged. Final warning will transmit under my seal and yours." The station chronometer rolled forward, each minute carrying the weight of decision. In public channels, the Sari commentators still mocked paper courage and predicted capitulation in 17 minutes after first contact. In private channels, human commands synchronized dispersed assets with the careful rhythm of people who had planned for this category of threat long before anyone called it probable. Mara walked from Stack 9 to the core control vault with 2 security officers at her flanks and a data crystal in her coat pocket containing a fragment the Thessari believed lost forever. She did not quicken her pace. At Docking Ring C, civilian workers sealed blast baffles and handed medkits to triage teams who hoped not to need them. When Mitchell's hour expired, his boarding lances turned toward Khepri like a sentence already decided. The first impact alert had not yet sounded, but every person who mattered on that station understood one fact with perfect clarity. The Thessari had mistaken patience for frailty, and history was about to correct them in public. The first impact alert hit Khepri as a flat chime, almost polite, followed half a second later by a deeper structural tremor that ran through the station like distant thunder. Overhead lights shifted from white to amber red. Bulkhead indicators flashed docking ring vectors in disciplined sequence rather than panic bloom. Mara Ellis stood at core control with her hand on the authorization glass, watching Ring C register 6 incoming boarding lances and 2 heavy cutters angling for emergency maintenance callers they should never have known existed. Mitchell reopened the public channel before the second tremor faded. He did not waste time on preamble. Custodian Ellis, Ambassador Volkov, and all decorative signatories listening from safe chambers, your 1 hour has elapsed. Transfer all Thessari records now, open your vaults, and stand down your escorts. If compliance does not begin in 30 seconds, we commence retrieval under battlefield authority. Resist, and this station becomes salvage. Volkov's reply came from the council relay, crisp, despite packet lag. Hi, Commander Mitchell. You are now conducting unlawful armed entry into protected neutral infrastructure under live witness. Withdraw immediately. If you continue, your command will be recorded as initiating multilateral aggression, and every action will be preserved for tribunal review. She paused long enough that everyone listening could hear their own breathing. This is your final opportunity to choose legal process. Mitchell laughed once, low and contemptuous. Paper courage, Ambassador. archive formalities recited by a species that confuses cataloging with sovereignty. You preserve what stronger peoples create, then pretend that proximity grants ownership. Tonight, you relearn your place. Marines, commence. Mara leaned toward her console mic before operations could cut the open feed. High Commander, for 300 years we have kept records your empires neglected, including your own. History is not spoil. It is inheritance under guardianship. You may still stand down and receive authenticated restitution through treaty channels. If you force this, we will defend memory. Her voice remained level. That statement is now permanent. The channel snapped shut. Capri's tactical board lit with red vectors. In Luna orbit, Admiral James Cooper listened to the exchange without comment, then turned to Commander Anna Nielsen. He gave us our legal threshold in his own voice. Nielsen already had the packet queued. Cross-confirmed by Valeri, Clerk Pool, and Council observers. No ambiguity. Cooper nodded. Then, guardianship clauses are active across all theaters. Execute Archive Escort Condition 1. Defensive posture only unless fired upon. Keep every witness stream redundant. His gaze returned to Kipri's map. He wanted spectacle. He will get documentation. On Kepri, Station Security Chief Idris Hale looked at Mara as if seeking permission to stop being a librarian's colleague and become what the day required. She gave him a short nod. Proceed with denial layers, minimize fatalities. No one touches the vault core. Hale keyed 3 commands in rapid sequence. All sections, this is not an evacuation. This is containment. Ring teams, hold your sectors. Medical triage protocols are live. Legal observers remain shielded and recording. The insult that started the physical war was not the first lance impact. It was what came immediately after. A Thesari combat broadcast injected onto station maintenance channels in flawless trade tongue, obviously prepared in advance. Attention civilian clerks and contract labor, the voice announced. Drop your tools, kneel with hands visible, and mark your foreheads with station grease for surrender recognition. Those who comply will be classified as non-entities and ignored. Those who resist will be corrected. It ended with the crest sigil of House Vark flaring over Kipri's own utility map. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then a Valeri systems tech in Stack 3 muted the feed and said, with brittle calm, I am not marking my forehead for anyone. Around the station, similar small refusals propagated through comms logs like sparks jumping lines. Mara opened the line to all departments. This is Curator Ellis. You already know your procedures. Keep your sectors sealed. Keep your records mirrored. Keep your people alive. They call this a retrieval. Treat it as an assault. She looked to Hale. Authorize Protocol Bastion. He hesitated only long enough to respect the gravity of the word. Bastion meant Kipri would stop pretending neutrality required helplessness. At 0001 into contact, the first Thesari boarding lance locked to Ring C and punched a corridor breach with shaped thermal cutters. Assault doors bowed inward. Armored Marines poured through in wedge formation, shields forward, shock poles crackling with blue static designed to incapacitate soft targets quickly and theatrically. Their helmet cams streamed to the spear of Vark, where Mitchell and his staff watched with the detached confidence of officers reviewing an old training film. Subcommander Terex, leading 1st Talon, felt that confidence like muscle memory. Their doctrine had broken coalition war rooms, palace bunkers, and pirate fortresses with the same sequence. Entry, intimidation, decapitation, compliance. Kepri's sensor profile had shown civilian mass, minimal hardpoint signatures, and escort craft with deliberately understated transponders. Humans were predictable, he told himself. They announced law, then pleaded for mercy when law failed. He took 4 steps into Ring C and met a wall of pale gray foam that exploded from recessed vents and hardened around his forward line like fast-growing coral. His point unit froze from the waist down before they had fired a shot. Chemical denial. His tactical adjutant barked, startled. Mobility compromised. Tarek slammed his gauntlet into an emergency release on his greaves and broke free. Furious. Burn it out and advance. At 0003, Kepri deployed shield buoys from cargo cradles hidden behind freight canisters, each unit no larger than a service drone, each one snapping into geometric lattice along corridor intersections and ring spokes. The result was not a single barrier, but overlapping pockets of distorted space that bent line-of-fire calculations and turned the Thesari breaching rounds into harmless sprays against bulkheads. First, Talon's second rank fired reflexively. Their own ricochets shattered ceiling panels and buried them in conduits. On the Spear of Arc, Mitchell frowned for the first time. Delay architecture, he said, dismissive, but sharper now. They rehearsed panic management. Tactical Officer Vesh rotated a hollow of Ring C, showing unexpected node activation spreading to Rings A and D. Not panic management, Commander. Preposition denial systems integrated with civilian freight geometry. Mitchell's crest flattened a degree. Then we escalate. Launch second and third waves. I want core access in 17 minutes as projected. Back inside Capri, Mara watched the 17-minute prediction timer appear and captured the Thesari traffic and felt, absurdly, a flicker of professional irritation at the poor metadata tagging. Even under assault, bad indexing offended her. She pushed the thought aside and opened a secure channel to Luna. Admiral Cooper, Ring C engaged. Denial layers holding but pressure increasing. Request confirmation. Are we authorized to initiate Protocol Nemasan at first breach of vault perimeter? Cooper's answer came immediately. Authorize now. Do not wait for heroics. Preserve the record first, then the building. Understood. Mara touched 2 keys and a palm seal. Across Kipri's buried network, 12 mirror queues woke from cold standby and began cryptographic handshake bursts toward allied vaults in Valari, Lum, Thel, and 9 human-administered deep stores. No announcement accompanied it. No triumphant music. Just silent progress bars climbing while Marines fought in hallways. At 0006, Third Talon entered through a maintenance collar near Stack 9 and discovered that human counterboarding teams were not stationed in dramatic choke points. They were distributed in pairs and trios, moving through service shafts with mapped precision, striking at sensor clusters, weapon couplings, and suit joints rather than torsos. The Thesari Marines dropped hard when gravitic tethers yanked them off balance and magnetized clamps pinned them to deck grates. The humans shouted concise surrender options after every takedown. Some Thesari accepted. Many did not. Terex forced his unit through foam and shield turbulence into an atrium overlooking a memory stack fault. He expected frightened archivists. He found blast shutters, improvised barricades of catalog crates, and a human security line kneeling behind portable field emitters with restraint launchers braced on shoulders like hunting tools. Their commander, a woman with a shaved temple and archive insignia on combat webbing, called out in trade tongue, "Advance no further. Drop primary weapons and submit to medical scan. You are being detained under heritage law." The formality of it, in the middle of combat, enraged him. He charged. The first restraint net hit his front rank and discharged an electromagnetic pulse that blanked their suit overlays for 3 critical seconds. In that blindness, human teams shifted angles, cut power to his rear unit's weapons, and sealed both flank doors with expanding foam plugs. Terex swung his shock pole at a field emitter and took a kinetic baton strike that sent him sprawling without breaking armor. Pain flared through his ribs. He rolled, rose, and realized with cold disbelief that he had been outmaneuvered by people he had been told were clerks. At 0009, Mitchell's bridge received casualty updates substantial enough to force silence. Not catastrophic losses, but mounting incapacitations, disabled suits, jammed comms, and Marines trapped in corridors that kept reconfiguring access priorities through station automation. "Where is their command node?" he demanded. Vesh answered carefully. "Distributed. No central kill switch identified." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Then burn toward the core manually. Commit heavy cutters." He leaned toward the command rail, voice dropping into threat again, as if contempt could reverse physics. "Signal all units. No retreat without archive custody." In Luna Command, Nielsen watched the same telemetry with a professional stillness that looked almost gentle. "He is feeding troops into a maze we mapped 6 years ago," she said. Cooper kept his eyes on a second display where icons marked as ceremonial escorts began shifting formation far outside immediate sensor attention. "He still thinks this is local resistance," Cooper replied. "Keep the escorts dark another 4 minutes. Let him commit his supply line." On Kepri, with Ring C contested and 2 additional breach points flaring, Mara received Hale's update. "We can hold internal for now. External docks are getting crowded." She looked at the mirrored transfer status climbing past 40% and then to the crystal in her pocket. The old Thesari Coronation Chronicle, warm from her hand. She thought of Mitchell, calling history a possession of the strong. She answered Hale without hesitation. "Then we stopped treating this like a station incident. Broadcast guardianship escalation to all signatories. Full witness, full record, and tell every team the same line. We do not surrender memory." At 012 into the assault, Kepri's defenders were still outnumbered, still under pressure, and very much still in the fight. To Thesari eyes, it looked like stubborn delay before inevitable capture. To the humans and allies holding corridors by meters and minutes, the shape of a larger design had begun to emerge. They were not simply surviving the first blow. They were setting the terms for everything that came after. At 013, while Ring C still shook with intermittent impacts and Stack 9 reported another breach attempt, Kepri's internal legal channel emitted a soft 2-tone confirmation that almost no one in combat recognized, but every archivist on station had learned by heart. Namazini Phase 2 had closed. The mirrors were no longer in transit. They were live, verified, and legally witnessed. Mara did not smile. She opened 3 windows at once, routed 1 to Ambassador Volkov, 1 to Admiral Cooper, and 1 to the Council's neutral clerk, Mesh. "Custodial update," she said, voice steady over the clipped background cadence of firefights and damage alarms. "All Thesari-tagged records in Kepri custody have completed distributed replication across 12 treaty vaults. Authentication hashes posted to observer ledgers. Chain of custody signatures active under emergency guardianship authority. Local seizure no longer alters strategic possession. Repeat. Local seizure no longer alters strategic possession." In the council chamber, delegates who had braced for another military bulletin looked up as if a new gravity had entered the room. Velari clerks began checking the hash strings in real time. Lum scholars cross-validated sample blocks. 2 independent legal observers from non-aligned systems filed notarized acknowledgments within 40 seconds. Volkov read the returns, then leaned toward her microphone and transmitted, on every open channel Mitchell's task force could not jam without jamming itself. "High Commander Mitchell, hear this clearly. The Kepri archive is now fully mirrored under multilateral witness. You cannot seize what is no longer singular. You can only add piracy, unlawful assault, and cultural endangerment to your indictment profile. Withdraw your Marines and request restitution through treaty court. Any continued operation serves no archival objective. The words reached the spear of Vark in the middle of Mitchell's order cycle. He stopped speaking mid-sentence and looked at Vesh. Status. Vesh's claws moved over the tactical rail, pulling up feeds, then legal mirrors, then encrypted telemetry from boarding teams. The human custodian is not bluffing. 12 independent vault confirmations. Hash chain anchored to council witness net. He hesitated, which Thesari officers were trained never to do. Commander, even full capture of Kepri's core will not grant exclusive control of the records. At best, we obtain one node and hostages. At worst, we create permanent evidence of assault with no retrieval benefit. Mitchell's crest tightened against his skull, an involuntary tell that younger officers pretended not to notice. Records can be invalidated by destroying the source station. Vesh answered with painful care. Not now. Their mirrors include provenance packets, timestamped by neutral clerks. Destruction would authenticate their claim further. For 3 seconds, nobody on the bridge moved. Then, Mitchell struck the command rail hard enough to crack its edge plating. Then, take the custodian alive and force revocation keys. On Kepri, Terex heard the revised order in his helmet feed, while kneeling behind a sealed conduit housing, one gauntlet sparking from a field pulse that had shorted his targeting overlay. Around him, First Talon had become an ugly geometry of pinned limbs, disabled suits, and furious breathing. 2 Marines were trapped by hardened foam at the atrium threshold. Another had surrendered after a restraint bolt locked both shoulders. Human defenders kept calling clear surrender terms through corridor speakers. Same phrasing, same cadence, as if combat were an administrative process to be filed properly. Terex hated them for that composure. He hated, more deeply, that it was working. Sub-Commander, hissed his adjutant over a private channel, we are receiving conflicting command directives. Capture objective remains archive core, but strategic net marks custody status as distributed. Clarify mission priority. He opened his mouth and realized he had no doctrinal answer that fit what he was seeing. The Sari training reduced archive seizures to a simple chain. Secure site, secure custodians, secure narrative. But narrative had moved. It had split and hardened beyond local force. For the first time in 20 years of campaigns, Terex felt doctrine not bending, not strained, but outdated. He switched to unit-wide voice. Priority remains advancement toward core personnel. Minimize lethal strikes unless required for movement. We need prisoners able to access revocation infrastructure. A human voice responded from the opposite corridor, amplified, but almost conversational. There is no revocation infrastructure, Sub-Commander. You are assaulting a legal proof network, not a vault door. Put down your weapon and we treat your wounded. Terex roared back on instinct and fired a pulse burst that flattened against a distortion lattice, scattering light across the ceiling in useless arcs. The same human voice replied, acknowledged. Offer remains valid. Sardonic understatement was supposed to belong to victors. Hearing it in the middle of his own assault felt like being lectured by gravity. By 016, the tide had shifted by margins small enough to miss if someone watched only hull tonnage and casualty columns, but unmistakable to anyone trained in operational purpose. The Sari boarding waves were still entering. They were still dangerous. Yet their objective coherence had fractured. Teams that believed they were seizing the only archive node were now chasing a custodian for keys that likely did not exist. Through corridors designed to consume momentum, every minute spent inside Kepri now generated evidence and attrition without strategic gain. Mara saw the shift from core control not as triumph, but as changing risk math. She called Hale and pointed to the board where red vectors had stopped deepening toward the vault heart and begun bunching at junctions. They are hunting people now, not records. Hale grimaced. Worse in some ways. Clearer in others, she said. If the objective is me, we can shape route control. She opened a secure channel to Cooper. Admiral, capability reveal has landed. They know seizure is pointless, so they are pivoting to coercive capture. Cooper's image flickered in with a calm that had unsettled enemies and comforted subordinates for decades. Understood. You bought the decisive thing, Mara. They cannot erase by taking one station. Hold your interior lines. Escort elements are moving. Nielsen appeared beside him, eyes on a scrolling lattice of vectors. External pattern confirms panic compensation, she said. Mitchell is feeding additional lances to salvage prestige. We can interdict if he pushes cutters toward the core shell. Mara nodded once. Interdict only what threatens life support or medical sectors. We do not turn stacks into kill zones. Cooper gave the smallest of smiles. You remain the least bloodthirsty person in this war room. Keep it that way. She terminated the line and keyed station-wide. All sections, this is Curator Ellis. Namazin is complete and witnessed. Repeat. Archive continuity is secure. Your work held. Maintain containment posture and detainee protocols. No reprisals, no heroics. We are preserving people now. Across Capri, tired defenders straightened at consoles and barricades. In Stack 3, the Valari systems tech, who had refused surrender markings 30 minutes earlier, wiped shaking hands on a utility apron and resumed routing medtelemetry. In Ring D, a human triage nurse tagged 2 wounded Thesari prisoners for priority treatment after an atmospheric duct rupture. One of the prisoners stared at her through a cracked visor and asked why. She answered without looking up, because breathable lungs are not a political category. On the spear of Vark, Mitchell was no longer fighting only Kepri. He was fighting the meaning of what had just happened. Vesh knew it. The bridge knew it. Somewhere above command decks, the ship's own morale algorithms likely knew it, though no one would say so while house standards remained lit. A secure line from Supreme Archivist Kelt Varen cut through the bridge channel with override authority. The Elder's image appeared, scaled too large, making his contempt seem architectural. Report. Mitchell kept his voice formal. Kepri remains contested. Human defenders deployed unregistered denial systems and distributed the archive externally in violation of expected custodial constraints. We are adjusting objectives toward command capture. Varen's eyes narrowed. You promised retrieval. I promised results, Mitchell replied. Results now require coercive leverage and possibly station denial. The pause that followed carried Senate calculations inside it. Varen spoke more softly than before, which was never a good sign. Do not destroy what the Empire needs to prove itself. If those records persist outside our control while you fail to secure symbolic custody, every rival house will call this campaign a self-inflicted humiliation. His crest angled forward. Bring me the human custodian alive with access pathways intact. If you cannot, then cripple distribution routes and prepare to demonstrate force so overwhelming that legal commentary becomes irrelevant. The line went dead. Vesh exhaled through clenched teeth. He just ordered 2 contradictory outcomes. He ordered status preservation, Mitchell said. Everything else is detail. Vesh dared one step beyond strict hierarchy. With respect, Commander, status cannot be preserved by pretending conditions have not changed. The humans designed this for cultural warfare. They are forcing us into a public loss corridor. Mitchell turned, slow and deliberate. Then we stop playing their quarter. Recompose the operation. He began issuing commands in clipped blocks. Boarding waves paused for the first time since contact. Surviving Talon leaders were pulled into a tight tactical mesh. Heavy cutters reoriented from broad breaching toward power and comm trunk lines. External frigates shifted to screen positions meant to isolate Khepri from reinforcement. A reserve Marine cohort, previously held for ceremonial entry once surrender occurred, was armed for hard close-quarters capture under jammer cover. It was regrouping, not retreat, and every officer on the bridge recognized the distinction mattered politically as much as militarily. Inside the station, Terex received the regroup packet while being dragged backward by his own troops through a half-sealed maintenance lane. He scanned the new overlay and saw the admission hidden inside polished command language. No more 17-minute projection. No more expected capitulation markers. No more references to clerks. The update treated Khepri as an adversary installation with distributed strategic depth. His adjutant spoke what neither wanted to say. "Subcommander, we misclassified them." Terex looked back toward the smoke-hazed atrium where human defenders had held, rotated, and held again without grand speeches or theatrical fury. "Yes," he said. "And now, we pay tuition." At 019, combat did not stop. It tightened. The Sari forces drew breath, recalculated, and prepared to strike with fewer illusions and greater desperation. On Khepri's tactical board, red vectors shortened, thickened, and aligned toward a new center of gravity. Mara watched them settle and understood the next phase had begun. The enemy had finally accepted. She was not guarding a shelf. She was guarding the terms of history, and they were coming for her accordingly. At 0:19 and 22 seconds, Mara keyed a priority route to Earth's diplomatic wing and found Ambassador Volkov already waiting, not with legal language this time, but with a sealed packet tagged Foundation Recovery Set, the Sari internal distribution authorized on custodial trigger. Volkov did not waste syllables. "We can hold this for tribunal phase, or we can release now and fracture his political support while his Marines are still inside your corridors. You have custodial discretion. I need your decision." Mara pulled the packet metadata into view and felt her throat tighten despite the practiced calm. The set contained what the Thessari had publicly pretended did not matter since the Flare Cascade: founding epics from the pre-imperial courts, house succession oaths, and the long coronation chronicle she carried in crystal form, all cross-authenticated against non-Thessari merchant ledgers and Valerie treaty copies. More significant than age was content. Buried in old ceremonial language sat clear legal boundaries on military command in disputes involving neutral heritage sites. Mitchell had violated everyone. "He called us clerks," Mara said quietly. "Let us do clerk work." Volkov's expression shifted by a fraction, relief hidden under discipline. "Authorize in your own voice. Council rules require custodial intent on record." Mara opened a channel that fed 3 destinations at once: Council Public Relay, Thessari Civil Frequency, and the secure court cache that no empire could scrub without announcing obstruction. Her voice carried station alarms and distant impact thuds behind it. "This is Curator Mara Ellis, lawful custodian for Khepri Neutral Holdings. Under active armed assault, I am releasing the Foundation Recovery Set for preservation of civil continuity. Included are authenticated Thessari foundational epics, succession protocols, and command limitations relevant to ongoing operations. These records are not a weapon. They are context. They belong to the Thessari people, to treaty law, and to history. Verification keys are attached. Interpret them in public." For 6 seconds, nothing happened but the ordinary noise of battle. Then the galaxy's information lattice convulsed. Council clerk pools lit with validation requests. LUM scholars posted first-pass authenticity endorsements within 90 seconds. Valari adjudicators published chain maps linking each file to pre-flare references. Trade Guild archives on PAX opened mirror bandwidth voluntarily, a gesture they usually charged fortunes for. The scholars of LUM appended a single line to their authentication brief. Content integrity high. Suppression attempt expected. On the spear of Vark, Vesh watched external traffic bloom from manageable streams into a stormfront. Commander, we have mass uptake across neutral systems. This is not limited to council channels. Thessaly civil nodes are pulling copies faster than our filters can rate limit. Mitchell's reply came sharp. Then cut civil nodes. Cannot without disabling our own fleet update mesh and Senate route. Do it anyway. Vesh did not move. With respect, High Commander, if we black out internal civil channels while foundational records circulate in the open, every rival house will read it as admission. Mitchell turned slowly. Every rival house already reads this operation as a test. I will not fail it because archivists found old songs. Vesh swallowed the argument he wanted to make and shifted to damage control, pushing counter-narrative tags, disputing authenticity, flagging files as manipulated ritual literature. It worked for 80 seconds. Then, two Thessaly temple historians, long considered harmless ceremonial figures, posted independent confirmations from private mnemonic caches that survived the flare. They were not human allies. They were loyal Thessaly traditionalists. Their verdicts matched Mara's release. The balance changed again. At 022, Subcommander Terex received a command burst that was supposed to tighten discipline. Instead, it carried uncertainty in formal grammar. Maintain mission continuity pending doctrinal clarification from Senate legal cadre. He stared at the line as if it were written in static. Thessaly orders did not include phrases like pending clarification during active assault. His adjutant patched in a secondary feed from Thessaly domestic channels, unauthorized but now impossible to avoid. Voices from his own home district argued over the released coronation clauses. One elder called Mitchell's assault dishonorable under ancestral law. Another demanded immediate victory to restore face. A third asked, in a tone that sounded more afraid than angry, whether their history had truly survived only because humans kept it when imperial systems did not. Terex muted the feed and braced his shoulder against a warped bulkhead while restraint fire snapped down the corridor. For the first time since entering Kipri, he felt not tactical frustration, but strategic vertigo. They had come to seize narrative. Narrative was now judging them. In the council chamber, delegates who had spent years treating heritage disputes as procedural noise leaned forward like witnesses at sentencing. Volkov stood and addressed the floor with cold precision. Members, this release establishes two non-trivial facts. First, humanity preserved records the Empire failed to protect, including records that limit Imperial force in exactly this scenario. Second, the current Thessaly assault proceeds in contradiction not only to interspecies compact, but to Thessaly foundational law itself. We are not asking for sympathy. We are documenting choice. High Commander Mitchell was warned. He proceeded. The Crystalline Consortium delegate, usually cautious to the point of silence, activated their mic. Our convoy lanes supplied Thessaly fleet's understanding contracts. Effective immediately, we suspend fuel transfers to vessels participating in the Kipri assault pending legal review. One by one, smaller polities followed with narrower but cumulative measures. Com relay denial, docking restrictions, sensor sharing with council observers. No one declared war. They did something worse for Mitchell. They withdrew convenience. Back on Kepri, Mara got the updates as terse legal notes, while she tracked moving red blocks on tactical overlays. The informational strike had landed hard, but it did not remove armed Marines from her hallways. She switched to station-wide. All sections, external legitimacy is shifting in our favor. Internally, nothing is easier yet. Keep procedures exact. We hold because we are coordinated, not because we are angry. Chief Hale answered from Ring D, breath rough from exertion. You are giving inspirational speeches now? No, Mara said. I am giving catalog instructions. A short laugh flickered over the channel from someone in engineering, then cut off as another impact rolled through the deck. 3 minutes passed in grinding close-quarters movement. Foam barriers were burned through and reformed downstream. Human teams gave ground where architecture offered no value, then closed traps where corridors narrowed. The Sari squads adapted, using drone cutters to peel shielding nodes from walls. It hurt. It cost. Yet every meter they gained took longer than their doctrine allowed, and every delay fed the public record outside. By the 27th minute of contact, Triage Bay 2 had treated 14 human defenders, 9 stationed civilians, and 17 Thessari prisoners, in that order only because triage severity decided sequence and vacuum injuries did not care which crest someone wore. A Thessari Marine with a fractured arm stared while a human medic fastened a splint. You should leave me, he said through a damaged translator. I am enemy combatant. The medic tightened the strap and checked circulation. You were a person with a broken arm. Classification came second. He blinked, unsettled. Why? Because if we start sorting breath by uniform, we become exactly what came through that hatch. In another corridor, Terex pushed toward a junction marked as a path to core control and found 2 humans and 1 Valeri tech holding a barricade of data canisters. Not soldiers by original profession, all 3 in improvised armor with archive insignia taped over old uniforms. They did not shout slogans. They did not charge. They worked like a practiced team. The Valeri disabled his front scout's sensor mast with a precision pulse. 1 human pinned the scout with a magnetic clamp. The other covered the lane and called surrender terms in clean trade tongue. Terex fired twice, advancing on reflex. A restraint bolt struck his thigh plate and locked his leg mid-step. He crashed to one knee, shock pole clattering away. A human in matte gray armor moved in, weapon trained but not firing. You are contained, the human said. Signal your unit to stand down, and we can move your wounded. Terex looked up, panting, rage and disbelief braided together. You fight like military and speak like law clerks. What are you? The human's visor reflected red warning strobes. People who read the fine print. He should have spat another insult. Instead, he opened his unit channel and gave a retreat code he had never imagined using against archivists. At 031, Mara met Hale at a cross corridor near core control where power flickered and the smell of burnt insulation hung heavy. Hale's shoulder plate was scorched. Mara's sleeve was torn where shrapnel had grazed but not penetrated. They took one glance at each other, registered functional status, and kept moving. Hale spoke first. You need to relocate. They have recentered objective on your capture. We can move you through Stack 11 maintenance and seal this axis. Mara shook her head. If I disappear now, they will claim we staged the releases and fled verification. I stay on visible channels. That is a very principled way to get taken. It is also legally decisive. He made a frustrated sound that carried reluctant respect. Then, we adjust. Decoy route for your transponder. Real route stays dark. We keep you mobile between witness nodes. She nodded. Do it. Inhale. No purge orders if we lose sectors. I will not burn records to deny trophies. We are not burning anything, he said. We are outlasting them. Outside immediate station space, Admiral Cooper watched icons converge on a tactical board where neutral markers had begun feeding him data voluntarily. Commander Nielsen stood beside him, reading the new political geometry as quickly as weapons telemetry. "Capability reveal 2 has bitten deep," she said. "Mitchell's support web is fraying. His logistics will feel this if he stays committed." Cooper folded his hands behind his back. He cannot disengage cleanly now. Pride, Senate pressure, and live witnesses boxed him in. That makes him dangerous. Nielsen highlighted a cluster of the Sayuri ships reorienting from broad assault posture to tight command screen around the spear of Vark. He is preparing a concentrated push, not random fury, directed strike. Toward Mara. Toward Symbol, Nielsen corrected. He loses archive exclusivity, so he chases visible dominance. Cooper opened a line to Volkov and Mara simultaneously. "You have likely 15 minutes before he commits his reserve in force. Political environment is tilting, but do not mistake that for safety. We are activating second-tier guardianship assets." Volkov's voice came first. "Council emergency vote just passed. Any vessel interfering with witness relays is now in contempt under collective sanction," Mara answered over distant weapons fire. "Useful, but sanctions will not stop a Marine with a cutter." "No," Cooper said. "That is what other tools are for." He cut the line and gave the order he had been holding since first contact. "Archive escort. Transition from ceremonial mask to operational posture. Interception corridors Alpha through Delta. Do not fire unless fired upon. Let them see the geometry." Across dark space lanes that the Sari planners had treated as background traffic, quiet human escorts unfolded like origami turning into blades. Hull panels shifted. Concealed arrays armed. Transponders updated from courier classifications to task force designations that no one outside Luna Command had ever seen listed together. On the spear of Vark, Vesh caught the update and felt his blood run cold. "Commander, multiple human escort elements have changed profile. Tonnage estimates were false. We are looking at a reserve combat network, not ceremonial guard." Mitchell stared at the board, then at the widening ring of neutral vessels pulling farther back to avoid the coming exchange. His voice dropped into iron. "At last, they show teeth." He opened a fleet-wide channel and spoke not to the Council, not to legal observers, but to every Thesari captain still listening for certainty. "For this campaign, we tolerated lectures, delays, and manufactured legality while lesser beings played custodian over imperial legacy. That interval ends now. We strike decisively, seize command authority from this station, and restore precedence by force. Any ship that cannot hold formation leaves my line and accepts dishonor." Several acknowledgments came instantly. Several came late. A few never came. Inside Kepri, Mara heard fragments of the speech through intercepted channels while moving between hardened witness nodes under Marine escort. She stopped at a viewport slit no wider than her hand and saw, beyond station glare, the first clear silhouettes of human escorts sliding into blocking vectors with terrible calm. Hale joined her, helmet under one arm, face streaked with sweat and soot. "That looks less ceremonial than advertised." "It was always less ceremonial," she said. He followed her gaze to the tightening constellation of ships around the spear of Vark, and then to the boarding alerts reigniting across inner rings. Then, this is the hinge. Mara touched the crystal in her pocket, the old Coronation Chronicle warm again from her palm. "No," she said, eyes on the converging vectors. "This is the argument right before the verdict." At 034, the Sari Reserve Marines launched under jammer cover toward core control, while Mitchell's flagship drove closer than any commander with strategic patience would have risked. Human escorts completed their interception lattice and held fire by fractions of law and seconds of restraint. Across Kipri's corridors, defenders tightened lines, medics reset triage, and witness streams stayed live. The final confrontation was no longer approaching from rumor or projection. It was arriving on engines, in armor, and in public, with both sides fully aware that the next decisions would be remembered for centuries. At 0:34 and 40 seconds, the first Thesari reserve lance struck Ring B so hard the deck plates rippled under Mara's boots, and the second struck 3 levels below core control with a scream of heated metal that traveled through the station like an animal in pain. Jammer noise flooded local channels, chewing speech into static. Then, Kipri answered. Idris Hale's denial grid shifted from reactive to predatory. Corridor shutters dropped in staggered sequence, not to seal whole sectors but to cut reserve Marines into isolated packets of 12 or fewer. Gravity bands inverted in alternating strips, pinning one squad to a ceiling, while another stumbled into foam jets that hardened over their weapon joints. Archive staff, who had spent years memorizing maintenance maps, moved with ruthless familiarity through bypasses that did not exist on public schematics. Mara watched the tactical display fracture into red islands and said, almost to herself, now they have to fight the building. Outside Kepri, Admiral Cooper finally released the restraint he had held since first contact. Archive Escort Actual, this is Luna Actual. You are cleared for Phase Argent. Disable command capability. Protect life support decks where practical. Every shot witnessed. His voice remained almost gentle. No one rewrites tonight. Human transponders shifted across 3 light seconds in a pattern Mitchell's operations board first flagged as sensor spoofing, because no sane escort network should have been able to change relative positions that quickly. Then, the false assumption died. The ceremonial flotilla split into layered combat elements and executed non-linear microjumps across predicted Thesari reinforcement lanes. Not random, not flashy. Each emergence clipped exactly onto the seam between supply escorts and spearhead ships. Within 30 seconds, Mitchell's rear munitions tenders had 3 human destroyers between them and the spear of Vark. Commander Anna Nielsen stood at Cooper's right hand and narrated the kill chain with the dry tone of someone reading weather data. Decoy constellation deployed. Thesari heavy batteries rotating to phantom targets off dorsal arc. Interceptor wing. Bravo has their fuel carriers bracketed. We are inside their logistics loop. She glanced at the legal observer feed. All council witnesses receiving clean packets. Mitchell saw the same geometry and slammed an open palm against his rail. Hard burn to Kipri. Ignore rear harassment. If we take the station core, their theatrics collapse. Vesh did not hide disbelief this time. Commander, with respect, this is not harassment. They have severed resupply and isolated our middle line. If we advance without fuel discipline, we strand half the group inside sanction space. Then half the group earns honor by staying, Mitchell snapped. He opened fleet-wide command. All warships converge on my vector. Commit batteries to station proximate threats. Boarders will secure the custodian and restore initiative. Hold your lines and remember who you are. Some captains obeyed instantly. Others obeyed 3 beats late. 2 captains broke formation and transmitted engine faults that fooled no one. By 0:38, space around Kepri had turned into layered choreography. The Thesari heavy cruisers pushed forward in ritual spear formation, dorsal spines bright with charge buildup. Human destroyers did not meet them head-on. They seeded adaptive decoy constellations, clusters of cheap drones and reflective chaff that copied thermal and drive signatures of capital hulls. The Sari batteries fired into ghosts. Human ships use those wasted salvos like opening doors. The first synchronized kinetic strike came from vectors Mitchell had left thin to protect his ceremonial approach corridor. 6 human lances fired in staggered timing, tungsten slugs wrapped in guidance sheaths that peeled away at impact. They did not punch for reactor hearts. They carved through propulsion spines, one ship after another, with surgical malice. A Thessari battlecruiser slewed sideways, engines dead, guns still live but unable to hold aim. A second spun broadside and lost targeting lock. A third tried emergency vectoring and drifted directly into its sister ship's debris wake. On Kipri's internal channels, someone in engineering whispered, "They're taking their legs, not their lungs." Mara answered while rerouting med supplies toward Ring B. That is the point. Inside Ring B, a Thessari reserve subcommander led what remained of a residual packet that had failed to disengage cleanly under Terex's earlier retreat code through a smoke-thick service artery toward Core Control's lower transit spine. He had stopped expecting clean lines or glorious breach moments. Every door was a gamble. Every sensor return could be a decoy, a trap, or a medic convoy he did not want to shoot. When his rear unit triggered a gravitic snare and crashed in a heap of armor and curses, he keyed Mitchell's command net with clipped honesty. Reserve packet degraded. We can push another 70 meters, perhaps 90, before mobility failure. Objective capture unlikely without full corridor sterilization. Mitchell's reply came cold enough to frost breath. Then, sterilize. The sub-commander looked at the map overlay and saw what sterilization meant now. Triage bays, witness nodes, archive stacks containing his own people's lost law. He heard himself answer, "Negative. That fire profile destroys protected records." A pause. Then Mitchell, lower and more dangerous. "Are you refusing direct order, Subcommander?" The officer took one breath. "I am refusing self-inflicted civilizational stupidity." The line went dead. 2 minutes later, his command privileges were revoked. 1 minute after that, human Marines reached his position and offered surrender terms. He accepted for his wounded before anyone had to ask twice. 7 minutes into Phase Argent, Cooper watched the broader map settle into inevitability. 32 Thessari warships were no longer fighting as a fleet. They were isolated hulls with dead drives, jammed command channels, and mounting atmospheric strain as damage control teams ran out of portable sealant. Human boarding groups launched only after propulsion kills, moving in paired cutters that clamped onto disabled vessels with gravitic lock collars. EMP filament nets cascaded through corridor trunks and dropped internal weapons to safe mode. Compartment by compartment, the Thessari resistance collapsed under teams trained to incapacitate and document rather than exterminate. Legal observers narrated over the public stream in precise language that somehow made the violence feel heavier. Timestamp 004512. Human boarders entering Spear escort vessel Kuret under Article 9 detention authority. Timestamp 004549. Wounded combatants receiving medical stabilization before transfer. The galaxy watched in real time as an empire's doctrine was dismantled by people it had called clerks. Mitchell refused to watch the public feed. He stood above his bridge pit as alarms layered around him and shouted new vectors that dissolved before subordinates could execute them. "Bring me firing solutions on Kipri Core. I do not care what stands between." Vesh met his eyes and, for the first time in years, chose career suicide over obedience. No firing solution remains. Our forward guns are off-angle. Our stabilization rings are damaged, and human interceptors are inside minimum spread. Any shot now hits our own Marines first. Mitchell backhanded the tactical console, cracking glass. Then, ready ramming posture. The bridge went still. Even seasoned officers turned toward him in disbelief. Ramming at this range against a station wrapped in witness feeds would not recover records. It would write confession in metal. Vesh spoke through clenched teeth. "Commander, if you ram Capri, you kill trapped Thessari personnel and destroy the very history Senate sent us to retrieve. There will be no narrative left to salvage." Mitchell's crest flattened. Narrative belongs to survivors. Before he could issue the final burn command, the spear of Vark shuddered under 3 concussive impacts in rapid succession. Human destroyers had not aimed for the bridge. They sheared the flagship's primary thrust vanes and cut auxiliary maneuvering fins to ribbons, leaving life support, gravity, and core containment intact. The great ship lurched, bled momentum, and drifted at a useless angle relative to Capri. Nielsen's voice arrived on all command frequencies, calm and formal. "Spear of Vark, your propulsion is disabled and your external batteries are locked by Treaty Enforcement Flotilla. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. Further resistance increases tribunal exposure without improving your position." Mitchell opened his mouth to answer with contempt, but a second tremor slammed the bridge as lock clamps bit into the outer hull. Hull cams showed 2 human breaching cutters welded to command deck access points. Magnetic boots clanged in the passage beyond the hatch. Someone on the bridge whispered a prayer to ancestral blades. The hatch blew inward in a controlled ring of white sparks, and human Marines flooded through in matte gray, rifles leveled, movement brutally efficient. Flash pulses and sonic bursts shattered the first line of Thessari defenders. One officer lunged and was dropped by a restraint dart that locked both knees. Another fired wildly and hit his own console. In less than 20 seconds, the bridge had become a maze of stunned bodies, overturned stations, and hard shouted commands in trade tongue. Mitchell did not surrender. He drew a ceremonial warblade from the command pedestal, the one reserved for victory oaths, and charged through smoke toward the breach hatch with a roar that sounded more wounded than fierce. 2 human Marines met him at the threshold. The first took his blade arm with a shock baton strike to the wrist. The second hooked his forward leg and drove him into the tactical rail. The blade skittered across the deck. Mitchell tried to rise, snarling, and a gauntleted hand pinned him between shoulder plates against the rail, face turned toward his own failing display wall. "Target secured," one Marine barked. "High Commander alive." Mitchell struggled once more, then went still except for harsh breathing. A split lip marked his lower jaw. He spat red onto the deck and forced out, "Finish it, human." Instead of an execution team, Mara Ellis stepped through the breached hatch under guard. Station jacket scorched at one sleeve, archive insignia still visible. In her hands, she carried a sealed crystal case, no bigger than a book. The bridge quieted around her in ripples, even among wounded Thessari, who recognized the etched sigils through cracked visors. She stopped where Mitchell could see it clearly and set the crystal on an intact corner of his tactical rail. The oldest surviving Thessari coronation chronicle glowed faint amber inside, intact, authenticated, preserved by the species he had called unworthy of history. Mara's voice was steady, almost sorrowful. "No. You will stand trial. Hear your own history read aloud and live long enough to understand what you tried to erase." Mitchell stared at the crystal, then at her, hatred and something like recognition colliding in his eyes. "You think this makes you strong? Mercy is weakness." "Mercy is restraint after capability," Mara replied. "You would not recognize the difference." He laughed once, raw and broken at the edges. "The Senate will deny this." Mara tilted her head toward the still-running witness drones hovering above the bridge pit. They can deny gravity next. A human marshal stepped forward, read detention authority under council emergency sanction and Thesari foundational law, then locked grav restraints around Mitchell's wrists and upper arms. The former High Commander did not bow his head. He also did not resist when they pulled him from the rail and turned him toward the hatch. As he was escorted out, Vesh sank into his command chair like a structure whose supports had been cut. He looked at Mara, then at the crystal, and said quietly, "We called it a hobby shelf." Mara held his gaze. "You called survival an inconvenience." By 052, 32 Thesari warships drifted dark in Kepri orbit, weapons cold, propulsion dead, life support monitored by the same human task force that had defeated them. Boarding actions tapered into controlled detentions. Triage transfers crossed between former enemies under armed escort and strict silence. On the public feed, the legal clerk from the Valari read a single line into record with shaking composure. High Commander Mitchell, commander of assault forces against Station Kipri, is in custody alive pending immediate transfer to the Galactic Tribunal. The battle ended without a flagship explosion, without heroic last stands, and without any room left for myth-making. It ended as a documented fact. Documented fact acquired weight almost immediately because the wounded still needed air. 6 minutes after Mitchell was removed from the spear of Vark's bridge, a ruptured manifold vented 2 detention decks, and both triage bays on Kipri received simultaneous intake alerts. Chief Hale arrived first at Bay, 2 with 3 human Marines on stretchers and 5 Thesari prisoners blue-lipped behind cracked masks. The senior medic scanned tags and pointed to the Thesari line. "These 5 first. Hypoxia window is shorter." One exhausted security tech stared at her. "They just tried to cut through core control." The medic did not look up from the oxygen manifold she was securing. "And right now, they are the patients most likely to die in 4 minutes. Move." By the time Mara entered, 2 Thesari Marines were already stabilized. One human defender was arguing weakly that he could wait, and a Valari clerk was reading names aloud so no one vanished into category labels. The clerk's hands shook through every syllable. On the spear, Commander Anna Nielsen watched life support telemetry and saw Kipri push spare scrubber canisters toward disabled Thesari hulls without waiting for political clearance. She opened a channel to Cooper. "They are sending oxygen to ships that boarded them." Cooper's expression did not change. "Log it. Then route additional med shuttles. If we let prisoners suffocate for convenience, we lose the argument we just won." He turned to the council observer feed and spoke in the same calm register he had used all night. "All witness nodes. This is Luna Actual. Human Task Force is establishing protected medical corridors for all incapacitated combatants, including Thesari personnel. Weapons remain cold in those corridors by mutual verification. Record that we are terminating capability to harm, not personhood." 2. Thesari captains who had ignored Mitchell's final convergence order transmitted acceptance within the minute. A third waited, then whispered assent through a damaged translator, as if expecting mockery for needing rescue from the species he had mocked on public record. Mara spent the next hour in 3 locations that smelled the same: ozone, sealant, and antiseptic. At 1:37 station time, she stood in the evidence room while a legal marshal sealed 3 artifacts into transparent custody cylinders: Mitchell's ceremonial blade, the cracked segment of tactical rail where he had been pinned, and the crystal case containing the Coronation Chronicle. She added a 4th item herself, placing Ambassador Volkov's paper note sheet into archival sleeve under chain protocol. 4 handwritten lines, each one an inflection point now indexed beside combat telemetry and witness video. Physical evidence logged, duplicated, and mirrored, the marshal said. Primary set to tribunal. Secondary set retained at Kipri under neutral seal. Mara signed with a stylus, then with ink on paper, because redundancy had become doctrine in one brutal night. At 2:11, Volkov joined Mara and Cooper on a secured three-way relay, while crews still cut trapped armor from corridor grates. External contacts update, Volkov said. Every sanction call made during the assault has replied. Crystalline fuel suspension is now formal. PAX relay restrictions are confirmed. LUM authentication panel filed final validation with no dissent entries. The Sari Temple historians who verified your release have requested protective status. Council granted it under Witness Protection Clause. She looked directly at Mara. And Supreme Archivist Varen requested emergency narrative injunction to suppress the Foundation recovery set. Denied unanimously. Cooper gave a grim nod. What about Vesh? Volkov answered. He requested legal counsel and offered full testimony. He says, quote, status preservation was the order, reality was the casualty. He will testify under oath. The loaded silence he had carried on the bridge finally paid out into a sentence that could not be unsaid. 9 days later, under white courtroom light that made every crest and insignia look equally tired, High Commander Mitchell stood before the Galactic Tribunal in restraint braces that allowed posture but denied theatrics. Mara sat at the witness rail with the sealed crystal beside her, while Volkov and 2 Valari clerks entered foundational exhibits line by line. No one rushed. The prosecution played Mitchell's threats in full. Paper courage. Era of librarians ends tonight. Retrieve what matters and burn the rest. Then they played his order to sterilize corridors after being told protected records were inside. Mitchell tried the old frame first, declaring military necessity, administrative collapse, species prerogative. It held for 14 minutes. Then a Thesari Temple historian recited command limits from the restored coronation text in his own language, and Vesh confirmed under oath that he had warned Mitchell the operation had no archival objective once Namazani closed. The chamber went very quiet. When judgment came, the presiding arbiter delivered it in 3 languages in plain terms. Mitchell of House Vark, you are convicted of unlawful aggression against protected neutral infrastructure, attempted cultural erasure, command abuse under your own foundational law, and deliberate endangerment of non-combatant custodial personnel. Sentence: life imprisonment at Blackwater Continuity Facility. Command rank stripped in perpetuity. No parole eligibility. No restoration petition admissible. Mitchell's jaw worked once, then stilled. He did not look at Mara when guards turned him toward the holding corridor. She watched him go, not triumphant, not mercifully soft, just finished with him. Mercy did not mean amnesia, and it did not stop with one prisoner. In the first repatriation hearing, Thesari civilian delegates arrived braced for humiliation and found indexed pallets waiting instead. 40 million recovered records were returned over audited transfer windows, house lineages, legal annals, ship registries, poetry cycles, census tablets, and oath rolls, including materials belonging to houses that had funded Mitchell's campaign. Mara personally briefed the transfer board on what had been redacted from public battle logs. We removed tactical vulnerabilities that could enable copycat attacks on Thesari civilian infrastructure, she said. Command-level culpability remains fully documented. Civilian exposure routes do not. A Thesari delegate from a minor river province stared at her for a long moment and asked, voice rough, "You protected people who cheered your destruction. Why?" Mara answered with librarian precision. Custody is not revenge. Is not. We keep history so societies can survive their worst decisions without repeating them as policy. By the second week of October, the same council chamber that had echoed with contempt hosted the Kypri Accords signing under full quorum. The treaty text did what everyone had claimed for years to want and never enforced. Memory sites became strategic infrastructure under joint guardianship. Seizure by force triggered automatic multilateral response. Independent witness streaming became mandatory in all heritage disputes. Custodial tampering became a sanctions offense with immediate relay lockout. The Thesari representation changed too. No admirals sat their bench. Civilian councils sent legal scholars and municipal stewards, watched by monitors from 3 neutral species and 1 human oversight office that now had a formal name: Human Stewardship Office, Cultural Continuity Division. When Volkov signed, her pen scratched audibly in the hushed chamber. When the final sigil settled, delegates who had treated archival law as decorative parchment rose to their feet without being asked. The last unresolved thread closed in a training hall on Thesar itself, where warrior cadets in dark uniforms sat through a required seminar titled Doctrine Failure Case Study, Kypri. A civilian instructor paused the transcript at Mitchell's bridge order and looked at the room until every crest faced forward. "You were taught that memory follows strength," she said. "Study this case until you understand the inverse. Strength without memory becomes panic with engines." On the wall behind her, tribunal excerpts ran beside Mara's custody clause and the triage log showing Thesari wounded treated first during atmospheric loss. No one laughed at the phrase era of Librarians ends tonight anymore. Cadets wrote it down as a caution. 1 year after the assault, Kypri's central corridor carried a new brass plate outside core control. Curator Marshal Mara Ellis, Joint Guardianship Command. The title had sounded like gallows humor the day Volkov proposed it. It stopped sounding humorous when fleet commanders began requesting Mara's risk assessments before entering disputed systems, and when allied species routed vulnerable archives to Kypri without demanding armed escorts first. On a quiet station shift, Mara stood with Hale at the viewport slit, where they had watched interception vectors tighten, and now watched freight lights move in patient patterns between restored docks. The Crystal Chronicle sat in a climate case behind them, cataloged under dual custody until Thesari civic archivists completed their rebuilt vault audits. Not hidden, not weaponized, not lost, Hale folded his arms and looked out at the orderly traffic. "For a hobby shelf," he said, dry enough to pass for professionalism, "it changed fleet doctrine." Mara let the comment settle, then keyed the next intake queue as another mixed species delegation stepped through customs carrying sealed memory spines for deposit. "It did what shelves are supposed to do," she said. Held. Outside, human escorts and former Thesari warships, now repainted under civilian registry, crossed the same orbital lanes without weapons locks, while Kypri's witness beacons blinked steady and bright against the dark.